minutes.
Perfect. Just remind me when you need to go, and we'll sign you off.
Okay.
We're live.
We're live. Oh, welcome to episode 18 of the Emmy Award-winning Beer and Bastards. We're back. Matt Palumbo is here for all you sycophantic followers of his and his two books that he always manages to plug on the show. We also have Mike Lee of Being Liberal Logic, that debunks being liberal memes, which isn't necessarily a very hard thing to do. We have Kevin Ryan, who should probably invest in some Just for Men, and is also the admin of Unbiased America, which claims to be unbiased, but is certainly very much so biased. We also have Grant Phillips. Can anyone else see Grant? Because I can't see Grant. I just see him holding an AR-15, which is pretty awesome. But Grant's from We Are Capitalists and writes for the Libertarian Republic. Do you still write for them, Grant?
I do.
You do still write for them, okay. And you write for the Libertarian Republic, which is Austin Peterson's outfit. And on the show we have a guest here, Professor Andrea Mays of California State University, Long Beach, and Chapman, right? Do you do Chapman?
Correct.
And Chapman University? Go ahead.
Yes, I teach in the business school at Chapman and in the econ department at Long Beach State.
Okay, so business at Chapman, econ at Long Beach State. You graduated from SUNY Binghamton, and
That's right.
That's your undergrad, and you got your master's of economics at UCLA, correct?
Correct.
And you just missed Thomas Sowell at UCLA, right?
I missed him by a couple years. I've seen him speak many times, but not while he was at UCLA.
Shoot. Did you have any? Go ahead.
We did use his textbook, Basic Economics. So.
You did.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Did you have any notable professors in economics there?
Oh, many, yes. We had, in the law school alone, there were two giants of the law and economics movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I found them through my mentors in the econ department, Ben Klein, who writes a lot about contracts and law and economics, and Armin Alchin, who wrote one of the greatest economics textbooks ever, along with Bill Allen, whom I knew at UCLA, called University Economics.
Right.
So I knew Alchin and Allen there. Walter Williams had already left by the time I was there, and Thomas Sowell had left. But I caught up with him in other places. I caught up with Walter Williams at George Mason University when I moved to Washington. So I knew of him, and then I knew him once I moved to Washington.
Sowell's book, Applied Economics, I think he mentions Alchin a lot. I don't know. I think he might have dedicated the book to him.
Right.
His saying was thinking beyond stage one. What are the effects of these policies, right? Which was a great book, one of his best. I think it was one of his best books. Maybe I don't know, up there with Economic Facts and Fallacies. I still can't decide which one of his books is my favorite. But speaking of books, your book, The Millionaire and the Bard, was just reviewed in Wall Street Journal and then in the New York Times, correct?
That's correct.
And most of the reviews have been very favorable.
They have been. I was extremely honored that Stephen Greenblatt, who is a giant in Shakespeare scholarship, chose to review the book for the New York Times, and he liked it apparently. So that's all very good news for me, especially because I'm writing really outside of my main area of expertise of economics. They're sort of the logical question that a lot of the Shakespeare wonks will ask is, well, who is she and where does she come from and why is she writing about this?
That was my next question. So if you could answer that, that would be great.
Yes, well, I had come across Henry Folger 3 times before I started writing the book. First, in high school, we used the Folger editions of the Shakespeare plays. And second, I came across him as one of the defendants in the 1911 Standard Oil antitrust case, which resulted in the breakup of Standard Oil into 36 pieces, of which Henry Folger was the president of the second largest piece. And then again, I came across the Folgers when I moved to Washington, D.C. in the 1980s. I worked in the Reagan administration, and I used to walk by the Folger Library every day on my way to work. So I looking for a subject to write about. My first book, my agent requested that I do something that would be, I wouldn't be starting from scratch, something I already knew something about, something that I was going to enjoy. And so I tried to integrate the idea of the plays with this Gilded Age industrialist who coveted Shakespeareana and collected Shakespeareana for 30 years. It was actually, and then, you know, this is the same guy who 9 to 5 ran the largest corporation in the world, and then after 5 o'clock went home and assiduously looked through catalogs with his wife to see what Shakespeare treasures he could buy in a particular week.
Right. So let me ask you. So what provided the impetus to write the book? Was it your love of economics? Was it your economics background, or was it a background in essentially literature, the Shakespeare itself, or a combination? I mean, what if you had to say that was something that provided more of an impetus? Which one would it be?
It was probably both. The main impetus was I was in a taxi cab with the publisher of HarperCollins, Michael Morrison, and HarperCollins was about to publish the second Freakonomics book. And he said, well, if you were going to write a book about economics, what would you write about? And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, no way. If I have an idea for an economics book, I'm going to write you a proposal. And that sort of got me thinking about writing a book about something related to economics. And I couldn't really think of another idea that I thought would be a great seller, which I would like this to be. And you know, sort of out of that, sort of integrating what I had done with Standard Oil, both in law school, in studying economics, and teaching regulation, I figure, okay, well, this is a good way to integrate both topics.
Right. So you're basically talking about a lot of is there a lot of antitrust? I apologize. I haven't been able to read the book yet.
Okay.
But you do get into antitrust in the book, right?
I do. Henry Folger was a lawyer as well as a bookkeeper. So he graduated from Amherst, and he began essentially as a bookkeeper at an oil company, which then had the great fortune of being taken over by Standard Oil, headed by John D. Rockefeller. And sort of fast forwarding, he worked his way up in the organization. He was on something called the Manufacturing Committee, which was essentially the governing body of Standard Oil through which all major decisions were funneled. And beginning in the late 1890s, and then ultimately starting in 1908 with the federal antitrust suit against Standard Oil, Henry took a major position in terms of counsel for John D. Rockefeller. Now, he was not their litigator, but he certainly had something to do with the policies that the firm was following, and what strategy they should use in trying to fight the government on these charges.
Okay.
So at the end of that process, it was a Section 1 violation, attempt to monopolize an industry, and essentially the remedy was to break the company into 36 smaller pieces, the largest of which was Standard Oil of New Jersey. The second largest was Standard Oil of New York. And then the successor companies to that are ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Arco, and on and on and on. So Henry became the president of the second largest piece after the breakup. Ironically, the court was concerned that somehow Standard Oil was doing evil deeds, and I can give you a little bit of background on why they thought that might be the case.
Oh, is it their excessive profits? Excessive profits?
Well, that is certainly part of it. Certainly part of it was that there were excessive profits. The reporting requirements were not as stringent as they are today, so it was a little mysterious exactly what the rate of return was on the stock. Nonetheless, what Standard got the worst rap for doing something that was incredibly pro-consumer. So let me go back to the early part of the history of Standard Oil.
Well, let me start by saying. So, are you saying that the monopoly, like the Standard Oil monopoly, what John D. Rockefeller did initially, wasn't bad for the economy? Meaning that he had to innovate. It wasn't just luck that he just found oil.
Certainly not. Certainly not. At the beginning, so I sort of
Are you
like
sure? Because I think he just got lucky, like white privilege.
Well, he started from nothing. He was
Okay.
not well educated. His family was poor. He came from upstate New York,
Yeah, I know
and
that well.
essentially had to support his family and his brothers and sisters and his mother when his father, who was an itinerant salesman, disappeared, essentially.
So he must have got food stamps, right? I mean, he must have made it on food stamps and government largesse.
There were no food stamps or government.
Are you kidding? How did people survive? How did he survive without government to help him? With foods. I mean, how do you eat? How do you live without wealth? How do people make it without government welfare?
How do you have Will in your class and not just smack him?
My arms aren't long enough, I wouldn't assault a student anyway, and not that one either.
Yeah.
The main thing is he moved to Cleveland and he went to work for essentially a trading company, and then he sort of figured out how he could improve on what the trading company was doing, trading commodities, and ultimately decided he wanted to get involved in this nascent oil business. 1859 is the first oil strike in the United States in Titusville, western Pennsylvania. So most people associate the oil industry with Texas or California, Oklahoma. It actually starts in western Pennsylvania. And Rockefeller did analyze the industry, and he decided rather than go into the wildcatting, extremely risky part of the business, exploration and extraction, he would stick with refining. And he had an idea that if you could scale the refinery, that the costs would go down. And that was the first thing that he did, was rather than opening a tiny refinery and refining petroleum at low scale and at relatively high cost, he would essentially take advantage of economies of scale and lower the cost of production.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing he did was innovate in vertical integration. So the sort of the untold history of the Standard Oil is that most of the cost savings that he experienced in the early part of the company came from vertical integration. So rather than hiring a plumber to fit pipes at the refinery, he had an in-house plumber. Rather than having...
I want to cut you up just for 1 second so people know what vertical integration is. It means, Rockefeller's buying up not only, what suppliers and shipping and so on and so forth down along the line. So that's what vertical integration means. I think vertical integration was seen by antitrust people in the early 20th century as something extremely nefarious, right? I think it wasn't until Stigler did a report on it sometime in the 50s saying that it's actually not a bad thing, right? I'm not.
The courts were less sure of what exactly the anti-competitive effects were of vertical integration. Right. They were sure of the bad effects of horizontal integration and economies of scale, and particularly price fixing. But in the early part of the history of the company, most of those economies came from vertical economies, cutting out middlemen, stopping middlemen from being able to hold them up. He bought his own cooperage to make barrels that the oil was being transported in. And mind you, this is refining kerosene for home illumination and heating, not gasoline. We're not at the internal combustion engines yet.
What incentive did he have for vertical integration and lowering costs? Isn't he an evil capitalist that wants to, raise costs?
Yes. No, he doesn't want to raise costs. He wants to lower his costs so he can increase his profit margin.
Wait, how does that happen if you lower costs? I mean, you're not making as much of a profit, and here he wants to lower wages for his workers but charge more for the product, right?
I don't know too much about what he paid his workers, but he certainly was able to lower his costs and raise his profit margin. And I
feel like he was a slave driver, and that's feeling is like empirical evidence. So
as far as I know, as far as I know, slavery was not legal in Cleveland in the late 19th century. So people worked for him on a voluntary basis. That's just a supposition I'll throw out there.
Right. So okay. So you got the vertical integration. He's lowering costs. I mean, and he's competing at this time, right? I mean, it's basically competition.
Yes.
Not only within his own industry, but also within like shipping, with the shipping, specifically Vanderbilt, right? So I mean, a lot of this is happening with competition, not with his own industry, but other industries as well. Thinking of how do I lower costs? How can I increase my sales, right?
Yeah, the railroads play a big part in the story in that about 40% of the costs of kerosene was transportation. So you had to transport crude from western Pennsylvania to Cleveland and then back from Cleveland east to the ports from which it was either exported or sold on the East Coast. So about 40% of your cost was transportation. And if you could figure out a way to lower your transportation costs, that would be a huge advantage over your competitors. So here's what he did. He essentially made it, on the routes where there was competition, he made the railroads compete for his business. And he said, look, I can guarantee you minimum volumes every day that far exceed your largest customer now. Give me the best price and I'll ship with you only. And you know, that was essentially the offer that he made to the railroad. So the one that had the best deal for him, that gave him the lowest cost, is the one that got his business. That's at the beginning. So let me add that at the end, sort of at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, the railroads caught on to how to make money, namely not to compete with each other based on price, but to attempt to price fix. So let's say, for example, you have 3 railroads that are serving New York to Cleveland, and there's really not enough traffic to cover the variable costs of all 3 railroads. Mm-hmm. So you have two alternatives. One is you try to steal the other guy's customers by cutting price to him.
Right.
That was really what the railroads did for most of the history of the Standard Oil Company. The other choice is get the customer to essentially fix the price for the railroads, have the railroads fix their prices, and then have the customer rat on them if they cheat. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially the bad part of what Standard Oil did, was that Rockefeller essentially served as an enforcer for the railroad cartel. The early history, they lowered tremendously the cost of kerosene. The cost of kerosene had come down tremendously from the beginning of the Civil War to the end of the 1900s, the beginning of the 1900s. But they did certainly facilitate the cartel behavior of the railroads.
So essentially the one bad part of Standard Oil and Rockefeller specifically was the cartelization of the railroad company?
That's correct. Being the enforcer for them in exchange for getting a really good deal for himself, and really good deal for his customers.
And up until then, the benefits have been symmetrical between Rockefeller and the consumer, and at that point, with the cartelization of the railroads, it was asymmetrical with the consumer and Rockefeller, correct? That Rockefeller benefited and the consumer did. Now, would you advocate for state intervention at that point?
Oh, the state did intervene, but not in the way you would anticipate.
But I mean, would you say that this opens up a case for the state to intervene insofar as if it's hurting the consumer to the benefit of Rockefeller in this case?
Certainly, they should break up the railroad cartel.
Okay.
Certainly, they should. But you want me to tell you what really happened?
Yes.
Okay. What really happens is the railroads that have this cartel that is sometimes stable, sometimes not, and Rockefeller is helping keep it stable. They go to Congress and they complain about cutthroat competition, excessive competition, cutthroat competition. And the Congress comes up with the first ever regulatory agency, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which, far from protecting the interests of the consumer, served to enforce the cartel for the railroads. They set minimum prices, not maximum prices, and they set barriers to entry so that you had to kiss the Pope's ring before you could open a new route.
So the government saw
and
this as an
essentially-
opportunity to take control of the railroad company themselves.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say the government agency was captured by the industry, that the industry had made this argument that doesn't sound crazy. It's an argument that is made over and over again in the legislative history of regulatory bodies, namely that there's too much competition. And government is going to step in and fix it so that there's not so much variance in price. And in the bargain, consumers get the privilege of paying higher prices. So the problem is the remedy for a potential cartel is to set up a cartel for sure with the government as the enforcer, which makes no sense. And I wish I could tell you this only happened once, but it happened over and over again, not just with the railroads, but with the airlines and trucking and so on.
So the argument has been there's too much competition, there's too much variability in prices, and that there's not enough competition.
That's correct. Simultaneously.
So who decides? Who is this cosmic entity that decides whether there's too much competition or too little competition, or is it just basically coming up with excuses for government to get involved in one way or another?
It's a little bit of that. I think the question is who yelled the loudest. So in the early part of the history of the company, it was Rockefeller's competitors who were complaining, wah, 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 his costs are lower than mine. You know, he can make a profit and he can undercut my costs.
Right. Was there any lobbying? Did they have any lobbyists at this time? Was there any lobbying being? There must have been.
Not in the very early part when we're talking about very small scale refineries.
Right. Okay.
Later on, yes, the railroads in the 1880s. By 1887, the railroads did have their lobbyists who were essentially trying to influence the legislation that created the Interstate Commerce Commission. Yes.
And Matt, you have a question too. Go ahead.
Yeah. So today a lot of people talk about breaking up the big banks as a solution to too big to fail. So I was wondering if there's like any unintended consequences of breaking up Standard Oil that you think might parallel if we were to break up the banks as well, that you can think of.
Oh, very different animal. So breaking up the banks would not solve the problem that plagues the economy, namely that the ultimate guarantor of bank risk is still the American taxpayer.
Right.
And it wouldn't make a difference whether we had 100 smaller banks or 5 big banks. That problem would still exist. In the case of Standard Oil, when it was broken into these 36 pieces, it actually improved the profitability of the company. In part, you can imagine it starts as a small company in Cleveland. It grows, it grows, it grows. It moves to New Jersey because the rules about who has to sit on the board of directors and where they have to live are better in Jersey than they are in Cleveland. So they vote with their feet. They move to New Jersey. When the company is ultimately broken up, it's a giant, somewhat hidebound organization. And breaking it into little pieces where there was more independence actually improved the profitability of the company. So I would say breaking up the giant banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Chase, etc., would not improve their profitability, but it also wouldn't solve the ultimate problem, which is that the taxpayer is the guarantor for the risks that they take with a lot of their money.
So basically what you're saying is the government has perverted the incentives and constraints of banks by backing up their money with taxpayer money.
Yes, and far from wanting to break up the banks, everything the legislation since 2010 has done in the banking industry has been to encourage an increase in size, not a decrease in size. So among other things, if under the legislation that follows the banking crisis in 2008 is called Dodd-Frank, and among other things, it adds layers of compliance costs. Economists are not per se against compliance costs if there's some corresponding benefit for it. So we like to weigh, if there's a cost, we like to see that there's some benefit that comes from that. The problem in the case of Dodd-Frank is that the benefits are not evident, but the costs are. And then ask yourself, if you added, let's say, conservatively $100,000 a year in compliance costs to a bank, who could best weather that? Would it be a small community bank with $500 million under management, or would it be J.P. Morgan Chase? So all of that creates incentive towards horizontal mergers,
Right.
and bigger and bigger, way beyond too big to fail.
Kevin, you had a question as well?
Yeah, one of my favorite interviews I've seen was with Milton Friedman, and he was always very fond of saying that he couldn't name more than 2 or 3 monopolies that actually cropped up and existed for any period of time in a market economy. And I mean, he gave the examples of De Beers, of the New York Stock Exchange, and I think one other. And the point being that in a market economy, actually having so much competition makes it very hard to continue to succeed before somebody comes in and undermines your market share, and that the best way to get rid of monopolies is to increase competition, to increase global trade, to decrease things like any sort of government regulations and tariffs. And to that end, I want to ask, isn't it true that by the time Standard Oil was broken up in 1911, their market share had already fallen from a peak of around 90% down to 60%? Wasn't it actually in the process of losing its monopoly due to, competition and so forth? And what would have happened if they had not broken up Standard Oil, in your opinion?
Yes, what you say is true. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what their market share was in 1911, but by then it had already decreased from its peak when in the high 90s, when Rockefeller first started his acquisitions of these refineries in Cleveland. I think ultimately what would have happened to them is what happens to any company that is hidebound and thinks they don't have to innovate. I don't think that was the attitude at Standard Oil. Their attitude was, okay, kerosene is not enough. Is there something else we can do? They found uses for byproducts. They found lubricants. Once the internal combustion engine became an important part, and diesel became an important part of the market, they moved into those. They were heavily into export. So it's not as though they were IBM sitting on their laurels and thinking, oh, we're forever going to be the biggest game in town. They were innovators. Where they fell down, I think, was essentially in the organization of the company, not in the idea that they were too big, but the fact that all decisions had to be run through this one little committee, and it allowed for less sort of independence of thought, maybe, if you will.
Okay, and to get into some wonky economic details, at Monopoly, I think Schumpeter writes extensively on Monopoly, and he's saying that a monopoly still wants to keep their economic profit as close to zero as they possibly can to resist opening markets for competitors. Am I right? I mean, it's not a monopoly itself doesn't mean they're not going to be squander ingenuity and competition, right? I mean, there's still competition from a market that may not exist yet.
Well, that also relates to Kevin's question, which was also about maximizing the amount of competition in a market. The one guaranteed thing that the state can do to increase competition is to eliminate barriers to entry where they exist. So if I had only one thing that I wanted the state to do in the economy, it would be look around for places that there are bottlenecks where there's barriers to entry and eliminate those barriers to entry. Well, unfortunately, you know the end of the story, which is most of the time the government is the entity that creates the barriers to entry. It says, okay, now we're going to have, for example, if you want to buy a piece of hospital equipment, you're going to have to file for a certificate of need, and we will decide whether that equipment is necessary or not. Or if you want to serve a particular, up until 1985, if you wanted to serve a particular pair of cities within the United States with an airplane route, you had to ask the permission of the Civil Aeronautics Board, may I please serve this route? And the answer would be no. So in most of those cases, the barriers to entry, sometimes they're erected by some unusual circumstance where somebody owns a unique piece of land and you can only get the pipeline across that piece of land. Most of the time, however, the barriers to entry are created by the law.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, you had a question too on I forgot what it was on, but go ahead and ask.
Well, she kind of touched on a little bit of this already because we were talking about breaking up the big banks, and she hit on it because I was going to point out that a lot of the mergers of banks and the consolidations of banks were caused by government regulation like Dodd-Frank. So she already pointed that out.
Okay.
But my follow-up question to that would have been, how exactly would you break up the big banks? Because the liberal solution seems to be more regulation. Well, when the government seems to get involved, we get Dodd-Frank, which provides an incentive to consolidate. The government insured J.P. Morgan against losses to buy banks. So how exactly, if I were to admit that I thought that the big banks were a problem, how would it even work to break them up?
I wouldn't advocate breaking them up. I would say pull the rug out and say, if you want to operate as a giant enterprise, you want to invest in strip malls or mini malls or resorts, that's perfectly fine. You have to do two things. One is disclose what you're doing accurately, and two is to sign this piece of paper that says the taxpayer is not responsible for your losses. And even when they passed Dodd-Frank, with a wink and a nod, they said, oh, we won't bail them out. We really mean it this time. We really mean it this time. It's not credible. So unless you have some way of turning the tolerance in Congress for failure of a bank, ultimately the taxpayer is still going to be the backstop to the risky behavior of the banks. So, and you can't blame the banks. They're very smart in saying, look, I can go to Las Vegas and I can play the long shots, and if I win, I get to keep my winnings, and if I lose, the taxpayer is going to bail me out. Hey, I'm going to go to Vegas and play the long shot too.
They're basically they're privatizing the benefits and socializing the costs. Go ahead.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I'm just wondering, is the rationale for bank bailouts because they say too big to fail, so there's a certain percentage of the taxpayers that are already a customer of this bank, so they're saying, well, if we let this bank fail, then X amount of taxpayers already are going to be harmed. So how would we, say, okay, I'm not saying that I disagree with you, I'm just trying to maybe get a clarification of what, how do you solve that, how do you mitigate that problem so that we don't even have an incentive to bail out big banks anymore?
That's a good question, but remember back to 1985 when we had different circumstances. It wasn't the mortgage market, it was something else that went wrong, but essentially deposit insurance sank the industry. They took the long shots, and when FDIC and FSLIC ran out of money, the taxpayer ultimately bailed out the institutions. In that case, it wasn't gigantic institutions, it was thousands of little ones.
Right.
That didn't mean the problem was any smaller than the problem is now. What the main difference is, and I don't have a good answer for you as to how you would break them up. I'm not sure that's going to solve the problem, is my point. So if you had 10,000 small banks, each doing what we're saying, if the same conditions in the market create the same hazard, the same risk for each of the institutions, does it matter if there's one of them or 10,000? They're all going to fall like dominoes.
Right.
So the only difference is when you have only a few institutions, let's say 4 that have 90% of the deposits, they have the power to go to Congress or the Treasury and say, hey, go ahead, let me fail, and look what happens, and it's on your head. So there's sort of a strategic bargaining position that the banks have that enables them to do this that would not exist if they were small.
Okay. That's a good. I would say, to your point, expose them to market mechanisms again. I don't even know if they have to disclose what they're investing in. I think their customers would be, if they know that they're not going to be bailed out, would be more prone to say, I want to know what this place is investing in. I don't want to just put my money anywhere. But if I go to Bank of America, what do I care? I go put the money in, and I know that's backed up by taxpayers, right?
Right. Well, let me give you one small step in the right direction. Maybe this will kind of get towards an answer to your question, which is lower the deposit insurance ceilings again. So we went from 100,000 to 250,000. Why were we increasing the ceiling for deposit insurance? If we lowered that, then people would make smaller deposits to the institution.
Right.
Institutions would have a harder time of attracting these enormous sums of money. That would be one small step in the right direction.
All right, Grant, go ahead.
All right, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for coming on. My question is kind of more to the future. You know, I look around at a lot of regulation that's passed. I look at Obamacare, a lot of the EPA recent regulations, and a lot of other ways the government is essentially cartelizing every industry in the economy. And then I see a study where self-employment's down, small business, enterprise, startups are down. Do you think that the government, through their own regulations, is as they did with the banks, is sort of cartelizing our economy into lots of small monopolies and oligopolies, and is that bad for our economic outlook as a country?
Oh, I think the main one that I would address is the healthcare issue, and that has been tremendously destructive to small business, to entrepreneurs. Rather than lowering the expenditures on healthcare, it has increased the expenditures on healthcare and made it more difficult, more expensive to have employees. So that is the number one most destructive regulation of recent vintage. The EPA regulations, Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, all along down the line, all do the same thing, which is encourage either standardization and franchises, which is fine, or consolidation, which is what they then complain about. So you create the regulations that induce consolidation, and then you complain about the size. It makes no sense.
So the regulations that people call for, that especially from the left, you hear them call for, they complain about quote-unquote Bush's unregulated capitalism, but then they complain for regulations, and then they just end up with what exactly they don't like in the first place.
Right. I mean, I've heard many times people say that, this industry is deregulated or that industry is deregulated. There is no industry that is not regulated. You may have changed the form of it from one to the other, but in no way is the banking industry unregulated. One regulation was repealed, and that was the Glass-Steagall Act, which was the wall between banking and insurance products. When Glass-Steagall was repealed and banks that had traditionally made essentially home mortgage loans, when that wall disappeared, did that make the institutions more or less risky? And the answer is, if we look past 2008, the banks that were diversified because they could be after the repeal of Glass-Steagall actually did better than the banks that were stuck in the traditional banking role. So awesome. No evidence of that particular deregulation created more systemic risk.
Awesome, thank you.
Go ahead, Maddie. Yours is on Glass-Steagall.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about Glass-Steagall, and you actually already answered my first question, so that's good. I know, I was actually reading one of Paul Krugman's books recently, Not for Pleasure, and he was talking about the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and according to him, one of the original provisions was that it put a cap on, or I guess it limited the risk that banks could take in making loans. I guess to prevent against moral hazard from FDIC insurance. Was that also repealed when Glass-Steagall, was Glass-Steagall as a whole repealed, or is that provision still part of it? And do you think that provision was worthwhile?
I don't know whether all the provisions were repealed or not. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry.
That's all right.
Did anybody else have another question?
I do. I have a quick one. I know our time's limited here, but I'm kind of interested to know ideologically, on campus, how is economics doing? I mean, are you attracting the same amount of students that you did, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? And also, ideologically, is there a different mix in the economics department as there is in some of the other departments? And which departments do you think are growing in popularity? Which ones are waning in popularity? I mean, I know when I was in economics in the early 90s, it was a fairly popular department.
It was the early 70s, Kevin.
Early 70s. I'm sorry, my Alzheimer kicks in. Anyway, it was a fairly popular department, and now I get a lot of glazed eyes from people on my website when I try to talk about economics. I'm just wondering, is there a trend, an upward trend, a downward trend? Have you noticed anything, Andrea?
On the campus that I teach on, economics has been a growing major. So our department has not been shrinking, it's been growing. That said, there are also additional new majors that are very popular, that are what I would call extremely soft sciences. And there's both. There's both. So we have, I'm getting a lot of feedback here.
I hear that too. I don't know where that's coming from.
Sorry, it sounds like I'm in the ocean, so I'm yelling a little.
I think it just got better.
I think certainly the econ major at Long Beach State is growing, but there are also other areas that are completely antithetical to economics that are growing as well. So as an example, in the basement of the building that I teach in, there are a lot of students who walk around with Che Guevara t-shirts and with social justice written on their t-shirts. So maybe Will can speak to that.
Oh yeah, I went to. I think I told you I went to one of my professor's offices, and there's a huge divide between the political science and economics department. And I went into my political science teacher's office, and I mean, he had Che Guevara paraphernalia in his office. You know, and I was shocked. You know, and I'm thinking, this is my teacher. I mean, he has a. How do you have a doctorate and you don't know what Che Guevara did? I mean, let's say that he was this great liberator, or that Marxism is an actual thing that works, or communism works. The man was a murderer. I don't understand how. I just don't. There's a lot I don't understand. Also, we had this wall up. It was the most anti-Semitic thing I think I've ever seen in my life on campus. I don't know if you were there. They had this a wall that was called like a wall of hate, and it was calling Israel an apartheid state. And there were obvious. I don't know if they were Palestinian, but they were Middle Eastern of some sort. And they were walking up to students. Hey, let's talk about what Israel's doing. I said, hey, get away from me. You know what I mean? I said, this is sick. You know, and the guy's like, oh, what's sick? You know, I just kept walking. You know, I don't, and in the economics department too, and I hang around the students. I don't think they really know the bigger debate. I think sometimes too, Andrew, you try to bait them into somewhat in class on some of the contentious issues, and you get no response, and I'm there fuming. You know what I mean? And I don't see them doing anything. So I don't even know if they really are paying attention.
Well, there is one person in the class I can bait, and that's usually you. So. Yeah. I can say something. Eventually, you'll be quiet for a while, but until it gets too objectionable, and then you will say something.
I try not to say anything.
No, I can say things that are pretty outrageous without any response to it. People write it down. Now, it may be, and I'll find out when I read my evaluations. It may be that people object to that. But they do not have an open debate about that. If I talk about the minimum wage, I am convinced that everyone in my class agrees with me. Nobody rises to defend it. So, you know, is it possible that maybe they all agree with that?
I don't know if undergrad's the best place though, and maybe Matt. Matt isn't. I'm in like areas of contention, which is political science and economics generally. I don't know. I don't think anyone else in the panel is.
I'm in a finance school. It's like conservatovia.
Oh, okay. So mine isn't. So, I mean, it's very restrictive undergrad. Kids just regurgitate what the teacher will say. So it doesn't really matter what is true. Certainly in like a lot of my public policy and law classes, it's just outrageous. the economic illiteracy of the political science department is embarrassing.
I can speak for Temple University, and I can say that in the classes I've taken, that's kind of been like either political or economics related. It's just people just it almost sounds like they're quoting memes when they talk. Like they just say what they saw on the internet. It's one sentence, and they're like, "Oh, is the middle class falling apart because of the decline in union membership?" And I just want to like throw up in my mouth, and I'm just, where do you hear this?
It's 5:45, Andrew. I don't want to keep you too long.
Oh yes, I'll give you another 5 minutes, and then I got to run.
Okay, I wanted to get into patents really quickly.
Okay.
I mean, I view intellectual property as valuable as real property in some instances. There's a lot of debate over patents and whether it stifles competition or whether it creates incentives for people to be creative and to create things. What's your take on intellectual property as far as patents are concerned, copyrights, etc.?
Okay, well, since I just published a book, I'm all for copyright.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
But let's say patents. So I mean, a lot of the barriers to entry or the increased costs of creating a drug comes from the FDA. So you can argue that we don't need patents for that, just get rid of the FDA, which is never going to happen. But what about let's say the Orphan Drug Act, things like that, things that create incentives for people to create something for a market that may not be viable to recoup your initial costs. Is there a place? Go ahead.
I think my answer is not going to be yes or no. My answer is going to be that the law over time has moved towards increasing the length of the terms of patents and copyright. So copyright lasts a long time. That past the death of the author plus 80 years is a long time to have something in copyright. Patents, 20 years instead of it used to be 17 years. So that extending the term essentially makes the problem worse that you're talking about. So you know, maybe there's a sea change afoot in Congress, and with the likes of Ron Paul, who would like to shorten the term of the protection. And the Orphan Drug Act goes exactly the opposite direction. In that case, you have additional protection afforded to a pharmaceutical patentee in order to provide incentive for anyone to do research on a particular condition at all. So, I mean, we know this affects people's incentive to conduct research and to investigate and so on. I mean, the main question is there a point at which people ought to be able to use other ideas? Design patents come to mind. The Samsung Apple case, in which the innovation of swiping your finger across the screen of a phone, is that really something that we want to prevent everybody else from being able to use? Well, if you shorten the term of the patent, that's a smaller problem. It doesn't go away, but it's a smaller problem.
So yeah, I mean, essentially the conclusion I've come to, it's a matter of degree, really. What's the right amount of time for a patent to last? And I mean, obviously, with these progressive reforms, it's the state. We're leaning more towards the state intervening into the economy, and I think that's probably an offshoot of that, is increasing the length of patents and such.
Well, I'm going to have to leave you because I have open house at high school tonight, so I'm going to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and buy.
Thank you very much.
Book, The Million Bar. Just Google it, right? Is it at Barnes and Noble?
It's at Barnes & Noble, and it's on Amazon. At the moment, it is #1 on Amazon in Asian biographies. I have no idea why, but it is.
Weird. All right, very cool. So thank you so much. We have to have you on again. It was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good to meet you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, guys, thanks for not being complete idiots like you normally are.
Shut up, Will.
That was a good show. That was a
great.
Good segment.
We're
right?
still going.
I don't know. Grant was kind of an idiot. I mean, look at what he's wearing.
I know.
Dude, don't hate on my statism, all right?
Let's see.
The show is still on.
Yeah, we know
so
it's still on the air. We know.
No, we know it's on air. Does anybody have anything to say? I mean, does anybody have any insight?
Yeah, well, you know, when she was talking about patents and Seoul's applied economics, he basically argued that pharmaceutical companies should have longer patents because they have to invest all this money in R&D.
I don't know if Did he specifically say longer
Yeah,
patents?
well,
I think
he brought it up as one of the reasons for rising costs in healthcare. I don't know if he actually said longer patents.
No, he didn't say longer patents. He said the reason for the issuance of patents was
because they think all the R&D costs into it, and they got to sell. They got a short time window before all the generics half the cost.
Right, but I mean, and like I said when I asked her the question, I said, you could argue that abolishing the FDA, which creates a lot of those costs.
Yeah, a lot of research. I think actually that might have been Sol's angle was if you didn't have all these added costs to your research, it wouldn't.
I still think you would. I mean, the cost may be less, but I still think you would need a patent on drugs in order.
Well, I think you should just because someone's taking that risk and putting their funds into it. I'm in favor of patents.
Right, and the success of, again, the Orphan Drug Act, which I'll probably write about in the next couple of days. Go ahead, Matt.
And the second a patent expires, there's some firm that swoops right in and makes a generic just like that. So, I mean, you need a patent to protect it for at least some amount of time.
Right, and that generic is, I mean, the costs are so incredibly low, which is a good thing. That's a great thing, but the thing is the drug probably would never exist if there wasn't that initial patent to begin with.
That's the big question. What would the world look like without patents and copyrights and so forth? I mean, there's a whole segment of the population who believes we'd be much better off without it, and that there would be more competition and there would be more innovation and so forth. I don't necessarily agree with that at all, but yeah, there's a big division, certainly in like the libertarian community and the right and so forth on whether or not copyrights and patents are helpful.
I think it's a matter of degree. I think it's a degree to which we give out patents and the length of time that we give them for. Mike, go ahead. You have something to say?
I think, instead of, being for or against patents as a whole, I mean, why not just make patents much more strict in terms of what you can patent? Because, I mean, I think John Oliver pointed out in his show, the problem with technology patents is they're often extremely vague. So, I can make, just say something that's very vague, and then anytime someone comes up with technology that's even somewhat similar, even if it's something I never even imagined, I could claim it's my idea and sue them over it.
Yeah, there's a lot of rent-seeking in patents, too.
I mean, there are entire firms that are patent trolls. Their job is just to come up with patents for things, basically for BS, and then anytime someone comes up with anything similar, they sue them. So.
Right. Mike, did you have something to say? Sorry.
Oh, I was thinking about the pharmaceutical industry and patents, and I think one thing that a lot of people, especially libertarians, don't think about is some of these drugs that are being developed are for diseases that aren't necessarily profitable unless you have almost a complete monopoly over the production of the drug. Otherwise, I mean, there's so few people that have this disease, and their lives aren't any less valuable than someone that has a more common disease. But if you don't provide patent protection to the people developing a drug to fix this, then they're not going to get any help at all for some of these less common diseases.
Well, wasn't the Orphan Drug Act the one that provided government funding for rare diseases, or am I thinking of someone else?
I don't know.
I'm personally not sure.
Okay.
I know one thing. So I work in manufacturing. I work in metal manufacturing. Place where I work is basically a really high-tech machine shop, and we run into people all the time who patent different materials and different metal finishing products. Like there's a brand new kind of aluminum you can only get one place, and it's 10 times the price, and the people have the patent for ever. I think that's a little ridiculous. It drives firms to this one source, and then what product they make is more expensive for everybody else. So I mean, I don't know. I agree with you, Will. It's kind of you got to pick and choose and decide how long it's available for.
The best thing to be is not ideologically attached to either or. It's not to say, oh, I'm anti-patent or I'm pro-patent. It's to see, again, like anything else an economist would look at, what are the costs and benefits? And I think
the fascinating discussion in terms of copyright is writers, art, music, musicians. I think what would it look like if they could not copyright their music, their works, and so forth? I mean, would we have a dearth of creativity?
Sure. I mean,
my books are copyrighted, and Kevin still found them online for free, so it probably doesn't work.
Well, the thing is...
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
See, but the thing is with copyright law is that you wouldn't go after let's say, who is selling your book for free. It's also a cost-benefit thing. If somebody, if I take your book and I copy it and I use it and I sell a couple copies, there'd be no point in coming after me. But if your book makes a ton of money, someone's reprinting it and making a lot of money off your book, then you would go after them.
Right.
I think it protects them only in egregious cases of copyright, not in the smaller ones where you're printing off some things or printing out chapters. Go ahead.
Like the way most people defend like Pirate Bay, especially libertarians, is that once you let's say I buy a movie, let's say I go out and buy Old School. If I download that, rip it, and put it on Pirate Bay, I'm not actually like breaking a copyright. I'm taking my property and sharing it with somebody.
Oh, so stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either way. I mean, those guys make so much money anyway. It's like, who really cares about downloading on Pirate Bay? But that's at least their approach. Is they're saying, I already have this property.
Because they don't understand that copyright protects expression. The CD is their property. The expression is not their property.
Yeah,
copyright takes that out of the commons. So
I still use Pirate Bay though.
No, I mean, yeah, I would use it, but I mean, like, if let's say that a studio puts out a movie, they put a ton of money into it, and everybody's ripping it off. A studio's not going to invest in it.
But if I download it, I don't think I'm the violator. I think the person who posted it is the violator.
No, I'm not saying that. Right. If you download it, you're not violating copyright. The studio would go after the website, not you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Napster. They went after Napster, not the individual people that are downloading.
Don't get me wrong. I use Pirate Bay and all this stuff too. The only difference is I do acknowledge it's stealing.
Yeah, whatever. I mean,
I don't feel bad about it.
I don't feel bad about it.
Shut up, Kevin. You could probably buy your own.
Look at what you're wearing. Look at what you're
have
wearing.
Your movie studio,
You're gonna go beat women after this. This is ridiculous.
Has anybody kept an eye on our chat?
I do have a little Jack Daniels here. That's definitely a pro woman beating drink.
Well, actually, just to keep this conversation going one more second, Canada has made it legal. Last I heard. To basically to share any sort of intellectual property under what you said, Grant, which is it's your property. You can share whatever you want.
Oh, so they're saying you can't share it or you can share it?
You can. And I think Canada is going to be a good case study in the effect on the market for things like music and things like books and novels and so forth.
If you're in a country that produces very little of those things, it's easy to do. I think Justin Bieber is about
Bare naked ladies.
Well, and the people that from other countries that do produce those things
they do it
here anyway.
Yeah, they do it here.
They live in the United States, so.
Right, exactly.
Do you blame them?
No. I mean, look at your shirt. Your shirt says it all.
See?
You good-looking status.
Back-to-back World War champs. They know who not to mess with.
I've actually always hated that shirt because I can't give the United States credit for winning World War I.
Here we go.
World War II for sure.
Oh my God!
Way to ruin the fun, Mike. Way to ruin the fun.
Status.
Why don't you just kick me in the nuts, Mike? I can't even have just a little.
Yeah.
Hey, World War II was all us, but
Mike, why do you hate America?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you burn flags and stomp on them? Like
Why do you want the communists to win?
Yeah.
Why does Andrea tolerate you, Will? Is the bigger question.
That's the
You don't failed that class.
I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised I haven't failed. I mean, we got to have her on again because she knows so much about. I wanted to get into Carl Menger. I wanted to get into Carl Menger again and do a bit on the Austrians, but we don't have enough time in one show. We'll have to get her back on to do that again. And
is she sort of Chicago school? Does she sort of
she's a Chicago, yeah. I mean, but she's not. Look, she's not dogmatic about either one. She loves public choice theory, which largely comes from Austrianism, as do I. Neither am I. I mean, look, if you're going to deny mathematics and economic methodology, that's crazy to me. But there's parts of Austrian methodology that you can't really necessarily deny, I would say. I mean, but
yeah, I've said that over and over again.
Right. I mean, because part of it is symmetrical with the Chicago school. Very little that's different. The only thing that's different is really the crux of the methodology, using economic modeling to discover trends, and using mathematics and economics, and that's where it separates. Also, you have a lot of misunderstanding about extremely dogmatic Austrians and their views on, obviously, Milton Friedman's views on the Fed, which for some reason they can't seem to get straight, and they can't get monetarism straight at all, which is basically an offshoot of Austrian principles as it relates to the money supply and so on. And so there's a lot of disagreements, and I think it's just because people don't understand the differences between each school, and that's something I wanted to do a show on at some point too.
Hey, Will, if you don't mind, let me ask you a question because she ran out of time, and I really wanted to pin her down on this. Ideologically, what is your department? And Matt, you can speak to this too.
Yeah.
What ideologically? I mean, are the economics students and economics professors, are they further to the right? Are they more libertarian? I mean, there's
Good
sort of
question.
there's sort of an argument about where economists come down. Are they more liberal or more conservative or what?
They're okay. If I'm going to look at my political science department and I'm going to look at the economics department, the differences are glaring. Obviously, the economics department is far more right-leaning than the political science department, and I mean far more. I have actual Marxist political science professors. I mean, I have the one I told you that has the Che Guevara signs. There's another guy that's a full-on Marxist. Generally, the guys that teach constitutional law are living constitutionalists. They don't believe in like an objective meaning of the Constitution that correlates to original intent. So essentially I'm a huge radical in that department. But in economics, I mean, I don't think it's not. That's a really great question insofar as I've had some Keynesian macro teachers. There's Keynesian macroeconomics teachers, and Andrea herself is probably one of the most conservative economics teachers there. I had another teacher, Dr. Ho, who's from Yale, who is probably, he's conservative, but not as conservative or market-leaning as Andrea, but I could be incorrect.
Do you have any people on the left or even?
Yeah, oh yeah, we have full-blown Keynesians teaching macro. I mean, I had a teacher in my macro department that, I mean, didn't know what Say's law was. If that's, I asked him first.
Say's law. How does he not know what that is?
How do you? He went to San Diego State, which is a great school, or UC San Diego, one of those damn schools. Doesn't know what Say's law is. I'm shocked. And I mean, we learned a lot of the ISLM models, a lot of the Keynesian liquidity traps, and the Phillips curve. I was like, why are we learning the Phillips curve? So, counting things as from like dearths and supply as contributing to inflation, which really kind of pissed me off. Yeah. Which is kind of like repudiating supply and demand. How do you do this in your mind?
Well, being an adherent to Keynesian economics isn't necessarily left-leaning in the sense that like
No.
Europeans are some of the.
You're right. You're right. No, I mean they're not like, again, they're pragmatic. They're like middle of the road. But I mean, politically they would lean left. But economically, obviously, they lean further to the right. It's hard to deny supply and demand, and it's hard to deny the modeling and science and the scientific method at that point. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and when I'm in political science class, these issues are far more contentious than they are in economics, and a lot of them run counter to one another. I'll be in a debate about why business is more expensive in urban areas as opposed to non-urban areas, and it's a contentious issue. It's because white people are racist in my political science class, and in my economics class it's because costs are greater to have a business. Insurance costs are greater in an urban area with higher crime.
Plus, if you're in a city, everything needs to be shipped in, so there's all those transportation costs.
So I mean, it's just it's actual logic used and then feeling used in the other department. And when I bring it up, I'm like, look, I'm an economics major. I have my book here. I have the book here, and it's not some right wing book. You know what I mean? And they just don't care. So I mean, that's a great question. The social sciences and the humanities, forget about it.
So I guess I'll answer next. More generally speaking, there's actually a really great book on media bias called Left Turn, and I think it's by a UCLA professor as well. So we pointed out that in departments like sociology and women's studies, there's 40 Democrat professors for every one Republican.
Right.
In economics, there's something like 2 Democrats to 1 Republican. So it's conservative in the relatively, not overall. However, economists who are Democrats are to the right of non-economist Democrats by a long shot. And the only department where Republicans outnumber Democrats is finance. And as a finance student, I have noticed that. The amount of millionaire professors I've had is insane. So they're all very conservative.
I was reading, I think it was a piece it was either Wall Street Journal or Forbes. And one of the explanations that I can't even remember who wrote the piece. I'll have to look it up so I can actually link it sometime, because this is 2 years ago I read it. One of the explanations of why economics departments, despite relatively being more conservative, relatively but not overall, one of the reasons was they thought that economics majors saw opportunities, the better ones, to find careers in finance and the free market than they would have had in academia. Therefore, they're not choosing academia. and then the ones that you get left over are the ones that chose that path because they weren't as concerned about the amount of capital they could accumulate in their lives. So that was something I read about in Forbes. It was a hypothesis. I'm not sure if it's true.
It is true that it is true that people who enter economics programs do become more conservative throughout the program. There's actually a Huffington Post piece out complaining about it, so that's where I learned it.
I just wish more people would respond to the ideas. I know in my economics department, and certainly in Andrea's classes, a lot of these kids are just eyes are glossed over. I mean, it's just write down what she puts in the slides, write down what she says, and then when I want to debate some of the points, I want to talk about the issues, they don't have a damn clue what I'm talking. They're like, oh, I don't care about that part. I'm like, what do you mean you don't care? I just want to know what's on the test. You know what I mean? So you get a lot of, they're really not, there's not much critical thought or learning going on in a lot of these departments. And I have a huge problem with that. I mean, here I am, I'm like, I got into the economics department to really, branch off more critical thought, debate these points, and they're not really thinking about them.
Well, do y'all think that they're, like, the ones who do want to debate it, the ones who do want to talk about it, do you think they're more open-minded in academia? Do you think, like, either teachers or students?
I think if they want to talk about it, they're already coming from a position. If they want to debate it, they're already coming from a position of, well, I'm a liberal, or I'm more free market. I think the ones that are open-minded just don't have an opinion, and I don't think they're old enough to form.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because I've taken gen eds. Like I'm not a political science or economics major, but I've taken gen eds that are in the political and economic sphere, and that's exactly what I find. They just want to the teachers believe what they're going to believe. And they're smarter than you no matter what you tell them.
Right.
And they're not gonna entertain anything else. And if you try to argue with them, they're just kind of scream at you until you stop. And then the students just either don't give a shit or don't care enough to maybe
Look, and they're young too. The students are 19, 20, 21. They haven't had.
To be perfectly honest, I think it's a plague in our university system.
No doubt.
Especially because a lot of them say they're diverse. Like Temple has this huge damn diversity program, and I'm like, diverse in what? You're all a bunch of liberal Democrats.
No, it's like diverse. Whenever I do that, you hear diverse. I say, give me a definition of what diverse is. What do you? What is diverse?
It means no white people.
So you have you have a lot of color in the school. That is a good job.
Right, because somebody has a different skin pigmentation or a different ethnicity, somehow they can't acquiesce to an American culture. I come from the same culture as somebody else with a different skin color. What the hell does it have to do with I'm lost. That's lost on me.
I don't know if you guys saw the news in the past couple of weeks, but there's an actual a group of I don't know if it's all Chinese or people from the Far East or whatever, but they're suing. I think it was Harvard.
It is
because
Harvard.
You saw this, Matt?
Yeah.
They're suing people from Harvard. They're suing Harvard because apparently Harvard they are taking less people from an Asian origin, even though the people from Asia have a much higher grade level. They're taking less of them because they want more diversity.
Yeah,
and the people are saying this isn't. The group that's suing them is saying this isn't fair.
I mean, they have a case. They certainly have a case. I don't know why it's them that are suing. I just want to get out of this racial crap. Anybody could sue for that and say, look, why aren't you letting them in? I mean, just because they're Asian. I don't know why somebody else hasn't brought this up. I mean, it's been brought up many times.
I was in research on affirmative action recently, and I can't remember the exact quintiles, but I believe it was that Asians who score on the MCAT for med school in the top 30% are accepted at the same rates as blacks and Hispanics, who are the bottom 50%.
Right.
I mean, listen, I'm all for fairness, but I think that costs lives. I mean, for the sake of diversity. I mean, I don't want an incompetent doctor, regardless of who they are.
So,
but hold on, these are private. This is where I say, okay, there's going to be a split. These are private institutions.
That's right.
Shouldn't they be able to do whatever they want?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that, but they don't.
Harvard, yes.
The Civil Rights Act. Yeah.
That was a big thing at Michigan, in Ann Arbor. I don't know if this is where this whole thing started to spread, was at the University of Michigan one.
Wasn't it Backy? Wasn't that Backy?
Yeah, that girl. I remember that white girl that got denied because of
that was Texas.
Affirmative action.
There was a lawsuit, and the state of Michigan ended up overturning affirmative action for college acceptance, and the University of Michigan was like, hey, we like affirmative action. We want more racial diversity on our campus. And basically what they said was, you're a public school. You don't have a choice. You have to accept everybody on equal grounds. Now, Harvard's a bit different. But yeah, this is where that whole issue started, was at Michigan. But Michigan's a public school. Harvard's a private school. Harvard can do whatever they want. Michigan can't.
Right. And it's Soule and Williams that did, I mean, extensive research on how this harms some of these people when they're getting into a school like Harvard where they don't belong, where they would have done better at another institution or another higher institution.
Yeah,
and they're failing out.
Ultimately harm Harvard's reputation in the long run.
Perhaps.
Like, I mean, if they want to do that, let's say that they do, and they want to do that, no one stops them. And 30 years from now, you have a lot of incompetent doctors or lawyers coming out of Harvard.
The thing is, Mike, they never get to be a doctor. If they're incompetent, the market won't accept them. I don't want this guy. He's incompetent. I get fired. You know what I mean? That's part of the problem.
But do you think Harvard's enticed to do this based on like federal funding?
I think Harvard is a Marxist leftist institution.
Well,
anyway.
okay,
Yes.
I agree with you on that.
Yes.
But to accept people based on race, you think it's a government funding issue or like a government support issue?
Yes, to Kevin's point, all of these schools have lobbyists, and they get a ton of money from the federal government.
I agree.
Every institution
agree.
does. So absolutely, they want to comply. They want.
I think college academia in the United States is a complete scam right now.
Right. I think I
how
saw.
It's so funded by the government, and
right. I think their endowments
pick and choose who's going to be the school. You know.
Right. No, it's garbage. What time is it, Mike? We got 6:10. I think we should close out the show.
It's 9/11 in the real world, you leftist.
Oh, 9/11! Bring up 9/11, you conspiracy.
No, let's just keep going. What's wrong with you people?
Look, I don't know what you guys are talking about.
See.
But steel beams cannot melt jet fuel.
I just want to say though that this show is brought to you by one Phyllis McCloskey, and
David
jet fuel cannot melt steel beams. She sent me $5 for a sandwich, so she's a sponsor. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Her and I are also in a committed relationship.
Didn't you meet her at the Talix Bar and Grill?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a good one.
Yes. Good. And we do, it's weird stuff on the internet. Anyway, Kevin, are you drunk yet?
No, actually, this is my second one.
Yeah,
you seem third glass of bourbon.
You seem pretty put together right now.
Because before this, I had to go to my
than usual. That's for sure.
I had to go to my son's lacrosse game, so I couldn't count my usual.
So you were drinking beer in the car.
Oh, I'm a good dad. I went to my son's game.
He skipped the lacrosse game. He didn't even go.
Yeah, he didn't even go. He got drunk instead. He got drunk in some dark alley.
Game?
Yeah. God.
Nice wife beater, by the way. I just noticed Will had one on too.
I know, right? Look at that.
It's the new trend, you old son of a bitch.
Don't let Will show his arms. This is ridiculous.
Ladies, no, look,
if he starts showing his arms, people talk. Get him off camera.
I know, it's true. There'll be layoffs soon. There will be layoffs. Kevin Ryan first to go.
I like this show. I think it went well. I like the fact. I love Andrea, by the
the Yeah, she's excellent.
You know what I've noticed is that economists, or even people professors of economics, shut up. They tend to be more unbiased than just about anybody. I mean, she didn't have a problem saying, if you were baiting her, you basically with your ideological bullshit, she didn't have a problem rolling her eyes and saying, "No, Will."
I've talked to her many times about these things.
But in general, she was on, in my opinion, the right side of the issues. But she didn't take an ideological view of everything. She seemed to take where the evidence pointed. I like that.
Again, that's economics and going to the scientific method and looking at things analytically, rather than looking at them through this postmodernist relativist viewpoint that most of the rest of the social sciences generally look at things through. I mean, she mentions a large uptick in like the sociology department. I mean, everybody at Cal State Long Beach is going for women's studies, Latin studies, sociology. I mean, what is sociology? Give me a break. What are you learning about feels?
It's like a retarded version of labor economics.
Yeah. I'm like, what do you learn? It's just like we're a bunch of people that feel they're intellectuals that have never done anything in their entire life get together and talk about how they feel about things, and you can't even test them.
What about economics versus a trade? I mean, then can you say the same thing about economics versus learning how to do something?
No, because generally engineers have to go into the real world and apply what they learn. You don't get the same, when we talk about intellectuals, rarely are we talking about doctors, lawyers, engineers, mathematicians. We're talking about people in the humanities. I mean, John Dewey, Webb Du Bois, Rawls. These guys that have never done anything. And I mean, look, I get this in the political science department too. I raise my hand and I tell my teacher, you're just saying stuff. And I know philosophy, and they're completely unhinged. You're unhinged from Aristotle. You're unhinged from Plato. I don't know. You're just putting words together at this point. And I have one professor. He's a great guy from New York. I mean, debated all the time. He's a total postmodernist. But I mean, this undergirds a lot of the left's thinking, and it is unhinged. It's just a bunch of stuff. And the other students who don't know a lot about it come up to me and say, "Yeah, he's not saying anything." You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people are just attached to things based on feelings rather than the philosophical underpinnings thereof. I think it's just, oh, I feel this way, and then they never really look at what undergirds those thoughts or what methodology people use to come to those conclusions, what deductive thought process was used to come to that conclusion. You know what I mean?
But do we need more economists, or do we need more people in the STEM fields?
I think we need more people in fields that are applicable to reality. Overall production. What is a sociologist going to do? Are they going to sociologize something? I don't understand. What are they going to go out there and complain? I mean, we got enough of that already. I don't know. I don't know what a sociologist would do. Academia, like we need more academics. So
it's like a pyramid scheme major. All you can do is teach, and you teach people who only can teach with it.
Right. I don't understand it. I mean, we're all going to school for something that's applicable. You did.
I already have a job. It's awesome.
Grant is. I mean, Matt Palumbo got a job. You know, and if Matt Palumbo got a job, anyone should get a job.
Field, and I think people should go to school for. I think engineering and technology is way more important than people going to school for sociology and the humanities and.
Right. I mean,
even economics. Like, what
right.
the hell? Like, what are you gonna do? Just become Will and just talk on a goddamn webcam all night? Like, god damn.
I don't know what I'm going to do. Look, I was political science. Economics is far more practical. It's actually in the top 10 undergrad degrees you can get.
For Will, it's either be on Fox News or serve drinks all night.
Well, I got one of those done. So Fox News is coming up. Speaking of Fox News, we have Whitney Neal on in a couple of weeks, who was on Fox News.
Oh, boy.
And we're still trying to figure out next week. And then you know who else I want to have on is Brian Kaplan to discuss education.
Oh, I like that guy.
Yeah, he would be great for education. I don't know if you heard of him.
Who's that guy?
Brian Kaplan?
Yeah, who's that?
Isn't that GMU?
Yeah, he's an economist, and he wrote really pretty with some erudition on the differences between Austrian and the Chicago school. He was an Austrian at one point.
Why can't we get through an episode without you saying erudite or erudition or something? You have like certain words that you just always say. It's ridiculous.
I mean, how else do you describe? He writes lucidly. He writes much better than Kevin's not saying anything. That's like he writes above a third grade level.
I wrote this down last time. Erudite and ameliorate. Those are your favorite words.
I think his favorite word is moreover.
Yeah, it is. I think Will's been eating paint chips as a kid.
Why don't we just have a show where you guys make fun of me the whole time?
That's what we're doing now.
Yeah.
I hate all of you. At this point, you've probably scared everybody away.
This is the best part of the show, and there's probably no one watching anymore.
Because of my vocabulary.
Actually, I think I like the fact that it was more free-flowing this time instead of, go from one of us to the next of us with questions.
Yeah.
I know, I got to be a lot more drunk for that because, you guys just ramble on forever.
Forever? What the?
Especially Kevin.
Can we talk about how Grant's had 3 sips of his Jack Daniels and he's hammered?
It's a 2.5 in tablespoons.
Oh, my God. Yeah, Kevin has no idea that we're still live. He's an old man and he doesn't know how technology works. Yeah,
Kevin
you see that
just
live?
Figured out email last week.
Yeah, he did. I went to the school in the early 90s. That was the best joke of the show.
It wasn't. It was in 1992 I got my
Get the hell out of
degree.
here. Went to school in 1992.
What did it take you, 14 years or something?
Yeah.
He probably graduated in, the 50s? And you're insulting her by claiming I'm old.
Oh, no, she's very young and beautiful. You're old and haggard.
You don't hit on her, Will. Jesus.
I actually thought about should I do this? No.
No, Will didn't think about it.
Yeah, no, I didn't. You're right. Thank you, Grant.
God, I hope you fail.
I know. I think I might fail now. I have her class next semester. I have her in industrial organization. So we're going to talk about.
I like it.
excellent teacher. I'm glad she's there. I just had her for law and economics, and it was a good class. Just not enough time to really learn what you want to learn in these classes. And she used David Friedman's book in law and economics. And Mike, that was her book, The Ordinary Business of Life: The History of Economic Thought. That was from her. That was from her class that I recommended to you. It's a great book.
Look at Matt. Matt just wants us to
so
end.
goddamn tired. That was a workable day.
What time zone are you in? Because where I am, it's only 9.
Yeah,
It is 9:20, but I've been working since 7.
Oh, cry me a
Since 7.
river.
I worked since 8.
Cry me a river. What is like your third day on the job?
Fuck you, Grant. I actually have to use my goddamn brain at the job, so it's exhausting.
Where is this at? Dunkin' Donuts or something?
No.
Did you have to get your mom to sign off on the application forms?
Mike, let's sign off. Again, I'm gonna sign off here. Again, follow We Are Capitalists and the Modern Libertarian that Grant is a purveyor of. Follow Unbiased America, which just got to 1 million likes, and then it was promptly unliked by 990,000 people. We have Mike Lee of Being Liberal Logic. Follow that page; it's an excellent page. And buy Matt's books. Again, Matt, can we see your books? I know you got them close by. Can we see? There's one, Conscience of a Young Conservative, and In Defense of Classical Liberalism. You had a really great review on the back of that In Defense of Classical Liberalism.
It's by some guy named Will Ricciardella.
It made me want to buy it.
He lifts daily. He does push-ups for breakfast.
I do. I eat nails for
Like
breakfast.
nothing.
I eat push-ups for lunch, and then I eat steel for dinner. Don't worry about it.
I heard there's a great section in that book about Costco versus Walmart.
There is, by some other guy named Kevin Ryan.
Yeah.
Who
Who got no IP, he got no royalties, he got nothing for
he didn't
that.
even get a mention.
Kevin, we made no money on the book. Trust me.
He didn't even get a
Yeah,
mention.
foyer. He doesn't need money.
Yeah, he has French doors and a foyer.
To be able to take money out of your mouths is what makes me live every day.
But buy his books, and thanks for watching again. The best show in the entire
Hey,
world.
what's coming up next?
Oh, and we have what is it? What time is it there now? 9?
After dark, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
10.
politics-
It's gonna be at 10.
Politics After Dark at 10 p.m. And join Liberty.me, which is actually a pretty good site, and you can do all your little social networking there as well. So you could sign off, Mike, and then we can talk about other things and use swear words and stuff.
Fuck you.
More than we use now. Oh, you see, that's really great. Your kid's gonna
All
watch
right.
this someday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Later.